Um, and from this point on, Cam, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, man. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. I had a problem with my computer a little bit earlier. I hope that if my screen starts changing randomly, I'm gonna have to like skip out and go change computers. But when I did my little test, there was no problem. So let's just kick this off here. Accessibility for Agile coaches, only the essentials. So to my accessibility friends in the crowd, we are going to be reviewing quite a few things that may be a recap for you. I'm just going to moving around on my, that's better. This may be like just a bit of a review for you, but that's okay. I hope you learned something. Hope you take something away. My name's Cam Beaudoin. Today I'm wearing a blue jacket, a green shirt, and a snazzy black accessibility cap. And you may hear me describe a few things on my screen. And this is for the audience members who may be visually impaired or may just need some extra help describing and understanding what's on screen. And with only a group of about, what did I see here? 12, 15, 16 people, this is going to be much more of a quote unquote conversation than it is a full-blown presentation keynote speech. So if you have any questions, I am monitoring the chat as I'm presenting here. So go ahead and pop stuff in the chat, and you'll notice that I'm quite interactive with my conversation anyway. So you'll see me ask questions throughout. So just to make sure my audio levels are okay, can everyone just open up the chat for a moment and put in your favorite emoji? I can start with that. My favorite emoji is the ta-da symbol. Martin with the full text emoji. Yeah, okay. And Sam with the winky face. Okay, great. See, we all have a favorite emoji. That's what I love. When I say favorite emoji, everyone's got their own that they always rely on. So I want to kick it off here. And I just want to say, in 1945, do you know what the biggest problem in the US Air Force was? What were they facing? The problem was there were too many plane crashes. Pilot performance was just really, really bad because when they were designing airplanes, they took some data from a book that was written 100 years earlier by a Belgian scientist. And this scientist discovered, he said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out what the average man is. And he went and he took a bunch of measurements of many men. And he took arm length and chest size and head size and leg length and stuff like that. So when they were building fighter jets, they said, hey, let's use this data. We've already got this data. We know what the average man is. Let's build airplanes around this. And they had lots of crashes because pilots couldn't control their planes. So at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the US, they took and retested 3,000 men, all these servicemen who were working at the base. And they took the 10 statistics that they found the most important to build airplanes once again. Again, chest size, weight, height, because they knew that the average American physique had grown, right? The American body. And across all those 10 metrics, they thought, well, let's actually find out how many of our own servicemen fit this average perfectly. So once again in the chat, I want you to tell me, across all those 10 metrics with 3,000 men, what's the percentage of men that were exactly average? Go ahead and put that in the chat. 5%, 0, 2%, 5%. Herman, you win, actually, you win. I don't know if you've seen, Drew, maybe you've seen one of my presentations before. That's right, 0 men were average. And this is really interesting because even if you reduce that down to only 3 metrics, only 5% of men fit this average as well. They had designed airplanes to fit nobody. And in fact, this is still how we build technology today, right? I mean, I'm pretty average, but I still have a bias, right, towards able-bodied white men. That's just my average. It's just what I know. And we're not the only people out there. So when you're building things, like, we have to think about that. Continuing on my story here, when researchers found that they designed this new equipment, they started focusing on adaptability and customization. On screen, I have an image of some pedals of an airplane. I don't remember what model it was, but they started adapting those foot pedals to, you can adjust them back and forward. Helmets, straps, all of a sudden they had helmet straps with buckles on them that you could adjust, flight suits and seats that could move forward and backwards. What was amazing is that pilot performance soared, and the science of ergonomics was really born and started to take off in the US. So when you focus on that adaptability, instead of just the average, you just get better results. And if you don't believe me, on screen, I've got an image of a YouTube video with some captions on it. Did you know that 80% of Facebook users now watch videos without any sound? By adding captions to your social posts, it's not just good for people with hearing loss, it's also just good for business. And if you don't believe me, here I've got an image of two girls taking pictures and stuff like that. Any Gen Zers out there, anyone who maybe caters and sells or has a service or something like that, supports anything that Gen Z is using, they're the generation of customized experiences, right? Tailored playlists and smart devices, metaverse coming around the corner. If you aren't thinking about how other people may want to use and adapt their technology to themselves, then you're already behind the curve, right? We're talking about responsive design all over again. Well, who cares if it's responsive design, right? I mean, you can just pinch zoom and it works. It's that same argument all over again. I'm not here to convince you about accessibility. The fact that you've already joined this meeting, you already probably have an idea of what accessibility either is. We'll get on to that in just a little bit. All right, so my name is Cam. I help tech teams recalibrate their communication and inclusion skills. And during my day job, I'm an accessibility professional up here in Toronto, and I've got an image of myself with the face mask on, just as a bit of a joke. And I do this because I really believe in equity. And we're not born equal, but I think that path towards equity is really through communication and technology. So everything you've heard about accessibility in your workplace and the environment or things like that, the DEI conversation, it's all true, by the way, right? There are many people with lived experiences who contribute to things like the accessibility guidelines. But generally speaking, when I see it, I see that the approach to accessibility is generally the same. It tends to be a lot of shaming and blaming or fear-mongering around accessibility audits or things like that. And that's a little bit unfortunate. And I hope to maybe change that a little bit and just in the way that we're having conversation today. And I'll let you know that you already have the best skill set for accessibility, which is empathy. And I want to tell you a story. So I had a client once who received an audit from a company, from the company that I worked for actually, and there was 2,000 accessibility issues. And it was a monster of a task, and she was not technical. The best tools I could coach her on was mindset. How do you talk to your team? How do you coach them? How do you keep them motivated? How do you keep them ongoing? She was a project manager. She wasn't a Scrum Master or an Agile coach or anything like that. But she was able to coach her team and move them forward for accessibility. And actually, she's moved on, and now she helps underserved communities like new immigrants or refugees or people with disabilities find jobs in the tech world. So it just shows that this skill set is not all technical. So just before I get started, I want to say an Indigenous land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I'm fortunate enough to live and to do business in here in Southern Ontario is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Wyandot, the Tianatati, the Senecas, the Anishinaabes, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. I work and live on settled land once inhabited by peoples now displaced. Today in Southern Ontario and is still the home to many Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to live and to work in this community. So, getting us started here. No one's coming here just for fun. So like I said earlier on, that you're probably, at least you're aware of accessibility or what it's about, because we're all busy. And I want to know that this is relevant to your job or you wouldn't be here. So in my experience, people fall into either one of two camps with accessibility, especially when they're not, or even sometimes when they are developers or things like that. But you're either in camp A, which is, I know I need accessibility, but I don't really know where to start. Or you're in camp B, which is, I've started with accessibility, but it's not working and no one wants to listen to me. And I try to talk about disabilities or the web content accessibility guidelines and people zone out and they don't know what to do. And it's really frustrating. They don't know what to do. It's super aggravating. Yeah, that's a pretty common thing. Oh, okay. I see Herman's already put in his response. Please go ahead. I'd love to know if you're in camp A or in camp B. I'll try and tailor this conversation a little bit more towards you. Or if you're in camp C, if maybe you're something else to that, put that in the chat as well. Put the reason that you're here, how we can help you out, and I'd be happy to maybe tailor it a little bit more. You got camp C. I got some camp C's in here. That's great. That's great. What I want you to get out of this is really a better approach when talking about accessibility. I also want to talk about some of those Agile best practices, as well as the team best habits for accessibility as well. So let's really get started here. Okay. So number one is we have to start small. So, okay, let's play a game. So I want to pick a role that you're either working towards on your team or things like that. So in the chat, I have 7 characters on screen. I've got you, which is the space astronaut, and I've got 6 characters underneath, all our I don't know, Navy men or something like that. And I've got developers, business analysts, BAs, designers, copy content writers, or quality assurance. In the chat, go ahead and put either your role or a role that we want to talk about. I'm just going to pick one from the chat. We're going to build a persona, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Martin is just me. I like that. He's just me. Got BA. I got SM. What's an SM? I don't know what an SM is, Humphrey.
Scrum Master.
Oh, duh. Scrum Master. Thank you. Product Manager. Okay, great. This is great. I like to see all the different roles. I saw some QA in there as well. So that's really good. Let's just pick a Scrum Master and we'll talk about that a little bit. So let me exit out of this screen. I'm going to reshare something here. New share. Go to this desktop. Okay, so we got a role of Scrum Master. And let's pick a name for our Scrum Master. Actually, it's her, it's a she, so it's a Scrum Master. Could someone give me a name? Just give me a name in the chat. Just pick a name and I'll put it on here. And also the industry that we're going to be working with. So name and industry, or name or industry. I don't care which one. Aviation, sure, aviation's good.
Somebody else come up with a name.
Yeah, Barbara.
Awesome.
Barbara, the Scrum Master in aviation. Okay, this is cool. All right, so next, let's go to the next screen. Oh. Okay, so we got Barbara. She's a Scrum Master in aviation. Aviation. Okay, cool. So let's talk about some of her professional responsibilities. Okay, so Barbara has obviously things to do as a Scrum Master. So what are some of the things that she needs to tackle on a day-to-day basis? Go ahead and put that in the chat as well. If you haven't noticed, I'm really big on interaction in my presentations, so don't lose that chat window. We're going to be talking a little bit more. Stand-ups. Refinements. Removing blockers, yep. Facilitation. Troubleshooting. Okay, I think that's probably okay for now. And what about in her personal life? What kinds of things could she be happening at home? What kinds of things that do normal people day to day? I can kick us off. Maybe her, maybe she's got a sick kid at home. Right? Oh, sick kid, working mom, has a dog. Anything else? Maybe she has a disability. Maybe she has something like ADHD. Maybe she's studying for something as well. MBA, let's put that in there too. So you can kind of start to get the idea, or military vet, sure. Vet, okay, spin classes, because spin classes. Okay, she's an avid Peloton user. Okay, there we go. Okay, great. So we've got this really great kind of persona here, and I like to talk about this in my presentation because it starts to humanize the person that we are going to be talking about throughout the rest of the presentation. What I think is interesting is that in all this list, and even though we're talking about accessibility today, accessibility is not present in any of these bullet points right here. We could say ADHD is a disability, but where's the accessibility role in her job? Like, where does it have to go? So when we start talking about accessibility, we're adding on to the top of someone's already, say, full life. You imagine a cup of water, it's already full. And we start to say things like, well, you should care about people with disabilities, and you should think of all these kinds of things with accessibility. And here's a bunch of new things that you need to focus on. So we have something called the curse of knowledge. I'm going to switch back to my full screen. Just give me a quick moment here. Desktop number 2. Great. And there's a medical term for cursive knowledge as well, and it's called a cognitive bias. So, there's a lot of similarities between accessibility and Agile practices as well. You weren't all, or we weren't all Agile champions. At one point, we had to go through a transformation. And you started seeing the importance and really the benefits of Agile in any kind of practice. Show of hands if you'd like in the chat, who has ever gone through an Agile transformation or helped bring an Agile transformation into an organization? Because that is the exact same thing as what accessibility is. It's a transformation, it's a process and a journey really to bring someone or an organization from point A to point B. And so we've made these things like rapid iteration a part of ourselves and a part of our identity. And I've never met a team who immediately just says, great, accessibility, we're on board, we're ready to go, we'll take all the practices and move it forward. Because we are talking about an organizational shift. So keeping that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about an engagement model that we have to think about when we're bringing either accessibility or anything else kind of into practice. So in any kind of transformation, an organization or a person goes through different ideas or different perspectives. And this actually happens whenever we need to learn something important or start to empathize or learn about somebody else as well. On screen, I've got an arrow going from left to right, and there's 5 steps to this journey. Now, I am talking about accessibility, but this does happen with things like Agile as well. Number 1, all the way on the left, is ignorance. Then you move to pity. Then you move to sympathy, then empathy, then finally compassion. I want to tell you a story. So I have a friend whose daughter was just diagnosed with childhood arthritis. And it's so now, because of the reduced blood flow in her legs and in her knees specifically, one of her legs is now shorter than the other one, and she has a limp. If we're thinking of accessibility or disabilities in this journey that I've got on screen, speaking about this disability, we'd have to think of how someone's mind would be if they heard about that for the first time. So number 1 is ignorance, where someone would just be saying, it's the parent's fault, didn't let her run around enough, gave her too much sugar, it's their fault, right? Total ignorance. If you're in the pity side, you're thinking more of, poor child, right? Poor family, how unlucky, she'll be suffering for life. If you move on to sympathy, you're thinking, well, that really sucks. I've got a cousin who outgrew it though, but he's fine now. But then when you start to move to empathy, you start to think about the people themselves. You start saying things like, wow, thanks for sharing that. How are you holding up? Or finally, when you're in that compassion, you start to think of, this is really big news for you and the family. How can I help? Now, if you're on this conversation, you are probably somewhere in that empathy, compassion level. You're at least at that level. So I've got that astronaut once again and a border around those two, that further point on the right, that arrow. But your team, your group, anyone you're talking to may be a little bit more to the left. They may be more in that pity or that sympathy level. So the knowledge that you already have in bringing some of these practices forward, you've got to work with a team and empathize with them in terms of bringing something like this organizational change or professional change forward. So your boss, your peers, or your client, where are they on this journey? So it's really important to think about them when you're bringing some of these practices forward. And your boss, your employee, Barbara, right? Maybe she's never met someone who has a disability face-to-face, or she's never really experienced a lived experience, or maybe she's never even put any effort into learning about empathy for people with disabilities. On screen, I've just got a big dot, a big circle. And when you approach accessibility, this is kind of what we think of it as, right? It's this really big, massive problem where you have to do things like you have to create an accessibility team or get leadership buy-in or establish accessibility policies and find accessibility champions and launch campaigns and do all these things. And that can seem like a monumental task. But if we can focus on what we need to do today, we're going to think about accessibility, we're going to think about empathy and disability and inclusion, and you won't get demoralized or burnt out. So my first piece of advice here is really start small. Start really, really, really small with accessibility. You will get a leadership buy-in and you will get your team's buy-in. It just takes time. Accept the fact that it's going to take time. Because we want to treat accessibility like a technical problem. And we expect it to be like, I just download these automated tools, I use this other tool, I use this browser plugin, and it'll catch only about 40% of the issues. And then you go back and you say, wow, I just got budget to do this, and now I need to ask for more budget to go get QA involved. But if you approach it a different way, if you approach it more like a transformation, you're going to get much more success. Because accessibility really is about changing habits and teaching people how to care about people with disabilities more than anything else. So on screen, I've got a little kid in a shark costume, and I just want to say that it's explaining baby steps, And it's amazing that we can turn that these same coaching skills and these same skills that you already have as Agile coaches or Scrum Masters, and start talking about things like, or people like who are amputations, or people with autism or macular degeneration, and we can bring that into the conversation early on as possible. We'll talk about some of those techniques in a little bit. But whether it's personas or inviting guests, which is always the best experience because you can start to understand what it's like to have people with lived experiences. And like I said, you may have to start really, really small, but pointing people in the right direction is sometimes really difficult, but it is worth it. Now, in our industry, we have this very common statement, which is, 1 billion strong, or the strong 15%. And it's, I feel it's a little bit unfocused. So on screen, I have just the text that says over 1 billion people worldwide have a disability. And we throw this to our team and we say things like, you should care about people with disabilities because there are 1 billion of them in the world. And they think in their minds, yeah, so what? We don't have a billion clients. It's the same thing as saying, well, we spew 10 billion metric tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. What can I do about it? So I would challenge you that whenever you are bringing this conversation forward, if this is an organizational change or even a team change or a single person change, you got to start making it relevant to the people listening. So over 1 billion people in the world or worldwide have a disability. And that's why it's relevant to you. So because Barbara works in aviation, I would say, and we move them across the world, and we help sell them tickets so that they can visit their friends and family. So this has now all of a sudden made it personal to the employee or the team member, and they'll start to care more. Next up, Agile best practices. So I've got 3 Agile accessibility concepts that we can start to talk about here. I want to keep it easy and small, just like I mentioned before. We're going to start small. And I'm going to say, let's go on a camping trip together because I like stories, and we're going to use camping as an example for this entire part of the presentation. So number 1, when you're going on a camping trip, on screen, I've got an image of the inside of a tent looking out into a beautiful scenery. It's got a nice lake and some mountains there in the background. When do you start packing, right? You start packing the morning before you leave, right? Well, no, of course you don't do that. That's crazy. You'll rush at the end. Nothing will get done. You'll forget things. You always start, a couple nights before, even a week before, to start getting prepared, start getting ready. And accessibility is done throughout the cycle the exact same way. Don't wait until the end. Don't wait until the end of the sprint. You got a half day left. You're picking things up and said, oh, geez, QA. Let's really get started with accessibility. I've got a chart on screen right now, and it's got 4 bars in it. The first one's design at 1x, development, testing, and then finally maintenance at 100 times. This idea of shift left is not a new concept. Okay, IBM actually penned a research paper in 2010, and it's called the relative cost of waiting. And actually, this is also very popular in things like QA and cybersecurity, things like continuous integration, how it shortens life cycles for defects and things like that. Also, penetration testing throughout a process is much easier than just waiting till the end. But if you look at this, the issues that are found in the design cycle are so much cheaper to find and audit and fix than they are later on in that process. So really, what does this all mean? I mean, start as early as possible, right? If you can catch accessibility issues in your design phase, it is 100 times, 2 orders of magnitude cheaper to find and fix than it is later on. Same thing, if you fix them in the development phase, that's still cheaper because you need to make sure that developers fix their HTML issues and double check that using automated tools or what have you. So concept number 1 is shift left. Keeping up with our camping analogy here, when you're in the back country, you're going to need firewood, and that includes chopping it. Every single day you need to chop firewood or else you're going to get cold, or at least go forage for wood. And these are the ongoing best practices that you need to maintain on any kind of agile project or any kind of best practice. So don't ever leave something until the end. So in the foundational phase, we need to make sure that accessibility awareness training is at least thought of, is at least brought forward at the beginning of a project or as early as you can get into there. That will really establish the baseline for the team to make sure that they will bring empathy into their project. Also, I put in design review here at the foundational phase. I know that in any kind of agile process, we're going to be moving kind of as we go and reviewing those wireframes as we go as well. But really to make sure that the requirements include things like accessibility, I think it can even just be a one-pager that it's included in the wireframes. It reminds people to think about it as they're building and creating those processes. When you're delivering, regular code scans are incredibly important. If you can integrate it into that CI, CD, continuous integration and delivery pipeline, that is the best place to put it, because when a developer will push code, it'll audit it right there. A few steps back, if you can't do that, that's fine. In-browser tools work really well for developers and for QA, and we're going to talk a little bit more in a bit. And finally, also accessibility testing, both functional and acceptance, are going to be hugely valuable. I've got the iterative sprint symbol there. I don't even know if this, I see it everywhere, but I don't even know if it has a name. The figure 8 symbol with iterative process. Regardless, that is, you have to always integrate accessibility into every single step of the way. So number 2 is delivery integration. And number 3 in our journey into the woods, on screen, I've just got a couple of elements that I have for a very successful camping trip. We need to make sure that the final checklist is approved for accessibility as well, which is, of course, our favorite artifact, the definition of done. So the definition of done is just so personal to every single team that it's very difficult to just say, add these words and that works. I've seen some definitions of done which are, got 5 points in them. And I've seen other definitions of done which have 400. And I don't know where it lands. I don't know what best practices are. Maybe if someone wants to enlighten me on what the best agile practice for definition of done is and how many points there should be, because I've seen teams treat them like a checklist. I've seen people treat them more like an ethos or something like that. Wherever you stand, I think there should be at least 3 points in them, which is number 1, that it passes, that every single feature or story passes automated accessibility tests. Number 2, they should pass manual accessibility checks. And number 3, that they should meet the accessibility guidelines, the WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, and the requirements in there as well. This will hold the standard. This is the latest version of the guidelines, and this should at least be a minimum for anything that's produced and delivered. And that's pretty much it. The 3 basic agile accessibility concepts are shift left, delivery integration, and to update that definition of done. And now in the last part here, team best practices, and try as I may, I can't make this part interesting for a presentation. The goal of presentations is really to change behaviors, not to dump data on screen. I mean, unless you're really going for that, I think that's much better as a one-pager or a document separately, but people tend to zone out when they find something that's not relevant to them. So I'm trying to keep this really short and making it one page. That here are the 7 behavior changes based on every role in a typical agile team that's going to be useful for them. So in the business section, you got to make sure that you use accessibility personas. And you can just search up accessibility personas on Google. There's a ton of them. In fact, the W3C has some great accessibility personas, but I find it really great to just get your team involved, create the accessibility personas together, and then use them as a team to move forward. You can create 4 to 6 of them, and I think that's just that's a good number. And then your stories can, your user stories can include, as a user who uses screen magnification, I want to be able to, submit an order. As a user who has hearing loss, I want to be able to watch a video. So at a minimum, I would suggest business include personas. Number 2, in design. Like I said, I'm trying to keep this quite short. The automated tools, doesn't matter if you're using Figma or InVision or Axure, there are automated color contrast checkers for this. So at a minimum, that would need to be installed. And then the manual, I would really highly recommend that designers add labels to any wireframes that are released, because when it gets handed down the line, everyone knows exactly what's going to be, what should be built as we go. And then it can also be fixed for next projects too, right? How many times have we ever seen a header, or excuse me, a heading that's built incorrectly? And if it was just labeled from the beginning, that would be fixed. That would be a really easy tweak to do. Next up, developers. So automated tools that developers can use. I like the Accessibility Insights for Web, which is a Microsoft plugin. And in fact, I know that a lot of larger organizations, sometimes they don't like people to install plugins in Chrome, just kind of however, that's fine. Hopefully, since this is a Microsoft product, it's a little bit easier to move forward. But the Accessibility Insights for Web is a great tool, and I highly recommend it. And as a manual behavior change, if I can just get a developer to tab and enter when they're building something, I think that's a win, because then they're going to be able to check the interaction and check for things like missing outlines around interactive elements on screen. And so this is just a huge boon for everybody. And finally, with QA, the automated tool is the same as developers, Accessibility Insights for Web. And the manual tool would be to at least install a screen reader onto their computer. If they're using a PC, in fact, if you can install because of organizational restrictions, use Narrator. It's included in every single version of Windows. And also, if they're using Macs, you can use VoiceOver on there. Same thing on your mobile devices. If you're doing mobile testing, use the integrated screen reader there. It's all good, as long as it's getting checked. If you need help with this, I'd say right now you can take a screenshot of this slide. Like I said, I don't like going too deep into all these, especially if we need a more focused conversation around with developers. Then I talk to developers about very specific tools, but it's very high level. I would say this is the absolute minimum that all these roles need. So I'm creating an infographic of this presentation. Just before I wrap up here, I want to say that if you're interested in it, I'm going to be sharing a form at the end. I really would love your feedback on what you've learned here today or what you've picked up, because I can, I'll send you that infographic afterwards. Also, I do a lot of work on LinkedIn. I'm really, really active on LinkedIn too. So the only way I can learn and grow as a speaker is to get that feedback. I'll put the link in the chat right now, and just kind of finish up here. So just as a quick recap, so accessibility is more about communication and empathy than tools and techniques. You got to think of it like a process, like a journey, and not a destination. And really, the goal is progress. It's not perfection. No one gets accessibility perfect, and it's because we'll never be able to find every single person with disability and understand their true lived experience. Even in my contracts that I sign with my clients, I have a realistic accessibility statement where I put that in there and I say, you know what, we are doing best efforts, and this is a progressive journey that we need to continuously fix and improve upon. And it's as an individual to the person itself as it is to the organization. So other than that, in the skills, shift left, continuously integrate accessibility, and don't forget to add accessibility into that definition of done. And finally, each role that has can have an automated and manual practice attached to it, and do that as much as you can. Try and switch those behaviors. So just before I wrap up here, I want to say that in my experience as an accessibility professional, I've been broken many times. And any DEI expert will say the same thing after the 100th time that they tried to convince their boss or their team or their client on accessibility, or they take a new role and then they've got to restart at square one. Well, I'm going to say that, but I'm going to say something else. I want to tell you that I've been speaking about accessibility since 2014. And in the past year, I've spoken to more organizations than ever before, and also with less resistance than ever before. Change is happening across organizations and even teams. Accessibility isn't this funny word anymore. It really is something that people are putting in job descriptions as well. So whether you're new to accessibility or you've already know some things, there's so much more to learn out there about the human condition and all of its facets. So if your goal in business is to get your product or service usable by as many people as possible, then inclusive design, development, and business practices will only make that better. And with that, once again, my name is Cam Baudouin. Follow me on LinkedIn. I do daily posts. I'm also starting a weekly live show called Normalize It, where we talk about things that aren't normally talked about in business, things like mental health, things like being nervous when you have to make a sales call, and things like, I'm interviewing someone who's blind this Friday. So if you can join that, follow me on LinkedIn and please join. I'd be more than happy to see you there. And like I said, please, feedback. It's the only way I can improve as a speaker and as a presenter. I would love to hear it, good or bad. And even if you don't fill out the entire form, if you put your email at the end, I will gladly send you the infographic once it's ready. And with that, maybe Martin, I'll hand it back to you. And if you need to reach out, you can find me at hi@cambaudouin.com, or if you know any event coordinators who are looking for someone to talk, speak, or coach on accessibility or communication, you can look me up there as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Cam, for that great presentation.